Welcome back to Three Go Searching by Patricia St. John. When we last left off, David had seen the two men down at the beach carrying long, mysterious packages wrapped in cloth, and he watched them row out into the darkness. Chapter 5, The Way Home. The little beach saw less of the boys after David's adventure for several reasons. First of all, both were secretly afraid of being there after sunset. They went on a bright Saturday morning and built a dugout of stones and sand into which they decided to creep every evening. The strange thing was, however, that as soon as the light began to soften over the sea and the distances grew misty, one or the other would always remember an urgent appointment, which made it impossible to go down to the beach just then, although, of course, he would be quite free tomorrow. But tomorrow followed tomorrow, and the waves lapped each other on a deserted little shore. From over the fence once or twice, they caught sight of a man pacing about on the sand, but they never saw the little boat set off on its secret journey, nor, although David often woke before dawn, did they ever see it return. Second, the weather changed, and the winds came sweeping in from the ocean. The sea was a rainy gray, and white-crested waves broke on the beach, tossing their spray over the rock. They could not have climbed along the little creek if they had tried. Third, Christmas was coming. And although Waffy did not keep Christmas, David's head was full of it, and his cupboard was becoming full of secrets. He and Dad were making a bookcase for Mother, and although she must have heard plenty of hammering and sawing, she never happened to look out of the window or ask questions, which David thought was quite remarkable. He also had Scotch tape with a dispenser for Dad, a ball for Waffy, and for Joan he had a little doll which he had bought with his own pocket money. He was also making a special album of Bible pictures for Leela in the hospital. He had been to see her every week, taking a picture with him to tell her about the story. But she did not know that they were being posted in a book for her to take home. That was a surprise. It would be a Christmas with a big hole in it because it was the first one without Murray. But David was beginning to get used to that, although Mother and Dad were not. He had a tiny Christmas tree which he decked afresh with all the beautiful treasures stored from last year, the silver star, the string of tinsel, and the tiny colored balls. On Christmas Eve, he would stand it in the window of the house, and everyone would see the lights shining, even the ships out at sea, if they glanced toward shore. The special day dawned clear and blue, the first fine day for a week. The sea was still rough, but it sparkled as it tossed, and the sun caught the spray like silver fountains over the rocks. There was no holly or mistletoe, but they shook the rain from the mimosa tree and filled the house with scented golden boughs, and an old patient from the hospital arrived early with bunches of early wild narcissus. David and Joan opened their stockings in the light of the wild red sunrise over the sea, and then ran out into the new, glistening, sunny, windy world to join the nurses who were singing carols at the door of the hospital. They were singing in the language of the land, and David joined them, singing heartily, while Joan made loud noises in no language at all, and Ragbag barked. Whatever the effect, everyone was very happy, and Waffy, who sensed presents and food, turned up too. Hail the heaven-born Prince of Peace, hail the Son of Righteousness, light and life to all he brings, risen with healing in his wings. David looked out across the sea, where the golden light of the winter sunrise danced on the waves. Sometimes the clouds really did look like great bright wings spread over the island and the headland, but the carol was talking about Jesus and what happened when he came into a dark, sad heart. David knew all about it this year, so it was the best Christmas yet, in spite of missing Murray. After breakfast, they opened their presents and then went to church, which was more exciting than usual, as everyone liked to come together at Christmas to sing the carols in their different languages. But as soon as church was over, David took his precious book and ran over to the hospital to visit Leela. He found her dressed and sitting in a chair on the sun porch in the sunshine. Each week she looked healthier and happier, and the twisted, bedraggled, monkey-like child who had been carried in 3 months before was now a pretty, bright-eyed little girl, almost ready to go home again. She was still hunchbacked, but now that she was strong enough to stand straight, it showed much less. She greeted him joyfully, thinking he had come to show her another picture. But when she saw the book, she was almost speechless with delight. "This is even a better book than the last one," she said, when she had turned the pages slowly from start to finish. "The other was all mixed up. There were cats and dogs and houses, just 2 Jesus pictures at the end. But this is all Jesus pictures and stories. David, you must tell them all over again before I go home. I think I'm going next week, so you must hurry." She spoke quite calmly, and David was surprised. "Don't you mind going home any more?" he asked. "Not as much as I did," answered Leela. "Why?" inquired David. "Has your master been to see you? Has he been kinder?" "Oh, no," said Leela almost carelessly. "He won't be kinder. I'm not theirs, so why should they be kind? But they want me badly. My mistress has had another baby, and she is weak and ill. She says she cannot carry the new baby and turn the grindstone all alone. Besides, the feast is coming near, and who is to whitewash the house for them? They have been 3 times to ask the doctor to let me go." "Oh, I wish you could stay," said David with a sigh. "It sounds awful in the village." "It was awful in the village," said the child thoughtfully. "After my mother died, I cried myself to sleep many, many nights. But it won't be so terrible any more. I know Jesus now. I talk to him. I know he is with me. He loves me, and if I get sick again and die, like I almost did before I came here, I won't be afraid anymore. I'll just go where he is." "Were you afraid before?" asked David. "Of course," said Leela. "I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what God was like. I knew I was bad, but no one ever told me about Jesus, who forgives sins and takes us to his home where we will be happy. You should come and tell all the people who are so lonely in life and so afraid of death." "Perhaps you can tell them," said David. "Perhaps you'll be like my special verse, shining like a light in the world." She shook her head rather sadly. "They won't listen to me," she said. "I'm only a little servant girl." "But Mother said that shining in the world doesn't mean just talking," said David eagerly. "It means being good and showing what Jesus was like. It means speaking the truth when other people tell lies, and being kind when other people are mean and nasty. It means being different, like a light is different from the dark." "Maybe I can do that," said Leela thoughtfully. "Now, tell me the stories, David." He told her the Christmas story from beginning to end, about the great light that shone on the shepherds, and about the wise men who followed the star and thought that they were going to a king's palace and were led to a little house instead. "Weren't they sorry it wasn't a palace?" asked Leela. "I don't think they minded much," answered David. "It says they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, even though they did find just a tiny house. I expect it was like one of your houses in the village, Leela." I don't suppose they cared where they were once they had found Jesus. That's how I feel about going home now." They were silent a moment. Then David suddenly realized that it was time for his Christmas dinner and said goodbye in rather a hurry. They were having a real feast at 1 o'clock. They had invited 4 or 5 lonely Christians and their babies in from the villages, men and women who had heard the gospel in the hospital, had believed, and then had gone back home. None of them could read, so they walked the miles over the mountains, hungry and thirsty, for more than Christmas dinner. They had all arrived when David came rushing in. Mother was serving up the food on 2 great dishes, one for the men and one for the women. It was David's favorite dinner, a dish consisting of steamed semolina and flour, built up like a sand castle, with a nest of onions and raisins and almonds and meat at the top. They all sat on cushions around 2 low tables and ate out of the 2 dishes, tunneling into the semolina castles with spoons. Then they had oranges cut in thin slices, sprinkled with sugar and cinnamon, and glasses of sweet mint tea. The villagers talked about their crops and cattle and their children. Waffy came and peeped in at the window and got himself invited in for cookies and a glass of mint tea. Then Mother went to the piano, and with shining, joyful faces, the guests gathered around and chose the hymns they had learned in the hospital. They had forgotten some of the words and longed to be reminded of them again, for they had nothing else back in the mountains, only the hymns about the cross and the home in heaven. They longed to learn to read, but it could not be. No one had time to go so far to teach them. So they laboriously learned the verses by heart whenever they came from their villages. Waffy did not like hymns and was impatient to be off to play with his ball. So he and David soon slipped away into the garden while Joan went to put her new doll to sleep. David wanted to show Waffy his Christmas presents, the kite Dad had made and was going to fly with them on the cliff. The knife with 2 blades and a corkscrew and a glass cutter from Mother, and a homemade slingshot which Murray had sent to him. Waffy was fascinated with the slingshot. He had never seen one before, and his fingers itched to be pelting stones in all directions. They played in the garden for a long time, and then wandered up the road with Ragbag, very full and sleepy after his Christmas dinner, waddling contentedly behind them. The road was empty except for the hospital ambulance, which stood parked outside the big gates. "Give me the slingshot," said Waffy excitedly. "I'm going to aim at that tree." "All right," agreed David. "I'll have a turn after you. We'll see who can hit that low branch leaning down to the road." But neither was much good at aiming, and the stones flew far and wide. Ragbag curled up in the sun on the steps and went to sleep. Waffy narrowly missed a hospital window. "I don't think we ought to play here," said David uneasily. "It's almost the same as throwing stones with our hands, and we aren't allowed to do that. I'm going to have one more shot at the tree, and then let's go and shoot over the back fence." He stretched the elastic back as far as it would go and took careful aim. But he must have drawn it askew. The stone, which was quite a large one, whizzed through the air in the wrong direction. There was a sudden crash and the sound of splintering as the ambulance window cracked from corner to corner, and little pieces of glass shivered onto the pavement from the hole in the middle. David stood transfixed with horror, staring at the damage. Ragbag woke up suddenly, leaped to attention, and growled menacingly, not quite knowing what had happened, but wanting to be ready. Waffy alone acted instantly. He snatched the slingshot from David's hand and thrust it into his own ragged pocket. Quick, he said, seizing David's sleeve and dragging him inside the gate. No one has seen. No one even knows that we are up here. Come down by the back way and pretend we were playing in the garden all the time. Your dad won't think of the slingshot. If he asks you, say we never even went in the street. David stood stock still inside the gate while Waffy tugged eagerly at his hand. He wanted to think. Hurry up, David, pleaded Waffy. Someone may see us here. Come with me, quick. David shook himself free and sat down on a low wall. His face was very red, and he looked very obstinate. I'm not coming, he blurted out. I'm going straight home to tell Dad. To tell your father? Gasped Waffy, who just couldn't believe his own ears. What for? Are you out of your mind? He'll take your slingshot away. I don't care if he does, said David, kicking at the gravel. I'm going home to tell him. Waffy advanced with clenched fists. He could soon bully David out of this madness, he felt sure. Waffy liked that slingshot better than any toy he had ever played with, and he was determined not to lose it. If you tell your father, he threatened, I won't play with you ever again. You're just a baby. I'll go and play with the big boys. All right, shouted David desperately. Go and play with the big boys. I wish you would. You always try to make me do bad things and tell lies and steal. I'm not going to do them anymore. It's no good trying any longer, 'cause I'm never going to listen to you again. I'm not going to be a bad boy like you any longer. I'm going to be good. If he had thrown a bucket of cold water in Waffy's face, Waffy could not have been more surprised. He stood quite still, staring, uncertain what to say next. Whatever happened, he must not lose David, for in spite of all his fine boasting, no big boy ever wanted to play with him. Besides, he liked David better than any other boy he knew. He thought it was far better to lose the slingshot than to lose David. He decided to change his tactics. Oh, all right, he said wearily. I didn't want your father to be cross and to take away your slingshot. My father would beat me till he nearly killed me if I broke a window. I have to tell him lies. But if you want to be good, I don't mind, David. Let's still be friends. I'll try to be good too. You can't be good by yourself, said David. I always did naughty things when you told me to, until about a month ago. But then I became a Christian, and Christians have to be different, like lights in the dark. Waffy, I wish you'd be a Christian too. Waffy shook his head. I follow my father's religion, he said. He would not let me change. And to himself, he said, I don't want to change either. How could I live if I had to speak the truth? They stood silent. Both were conscious of a gap between them, and they longed to bridge it. I wish Waffy was a Christian, thought David. Then we could both be lights in the dark. I wish he didn't care about being truthful and good, thought Waffy. We could have more fun together if he'd be like me. I'm going home, said David aloud. It will be time for our Christmas party. He rose to his feet, but he did not move. Come too, he said to Waffy. Not if you are going to tell your father, said Waffy cautiously. I won't, said David, not till the visitors have gone and we're alone. They went down the path together, both feeling rather sad because they both knew now that the other was different, and things could never be quite the same again. For it was not a difference you could forget or patch up. Unless one of them changed, the difference had come to stay. It was no good pretending that light and darkness could ever be alike. But they enjoyed the Christmas party, and the guests happily stayed, chatting and singing until one of the nurses came to take them to the Christmas service in the ward. David went too, to sing and watch the picture slides of the Christmas story. After it was all over and the guests had said goodbye, David went home alone. It was a dark night, for the moon had not risen. As he turned the corner, he looked up, and there was his own little Christmas tree with all the candles lit. Its light shone on the dark path, showing him the way home. He must find Dad at once and tell him about the accident, and the bravely twinkling tree gave him courage. He remembered poor Waffy, creeping along in the dark, always hiding and lying and deceiving and being afraid. He was going to pray for Waffy every night when he said his prayers with Mother, and for himself too, that he might somehow be like that little Christmas tree. For perhaps only by the light of his own courage and truth and kindness would Waffy ever find the way